Hey gang, thanks for joining me here today. I've got a real treat for you. It's a treat for me. My friend Jesse Koskiniemi is one of the best bear hunters in Minnesota, I believe. And we have talked a little bit before, and I thought, wouldn't it be cool to just talk about the things that we agree on and disagree on, and just have a conversation like we're sitting around a campfire about bear hunting. And just to give you a little background on Jesse, he's the current state record holder. You've got the biggest bear, which is this one right behind us here.
Yep.
That was killed in Minnesota, 22 and 13?
22 and 10.
22 and 10/16. It's the current state record bear. They measure by skull, and the weight was 602. 602 was the weight of the bear. And you've got other ones that are this size out there.
Yep.
And you actually shot a bigger weight-wise bear this year in 2022.
Yep.
This was shot with a firearm.
Yep.
And you shot one of the muzzleloader this year that is, the green score of the skull is bigger than the current state record muzzleloader bear.
Correct.
So it's potentially you could have two state records, but there's a rumor out there right now that there's one shot with a muzzleloader this year that's bigger. So we'll just have to see how that develops. But anyway, I thought it would be really fun to just talk to the viewers a little bit about the bears that you're seeing and how you're hunting them. And you went through the whole season and you shot this 685 pounder this year.
Yep.
Like a week before the season closed because you didn't want to go without a bear, I guess.
Right. Yep.
But tell me, let's start there and talk to me about the hunt from beginning to end for the big one that you shot this year.
Well, I always scout. Scouting's the biggest thing. If you get your bait in the right location, way out in the middle of nowhere, nobody's bothering it, close to a swampy area, I try to always find, huge trees so you got a good tall canopy where they can stay cool during the day. And so I found that and put a bait out there, and that bear come in a couple hours after I baited. So he come in the first day and he was there every day until I shot him October 3rd. I went out Sunday night the 2nd, and it came in really late. And for some reason around here, and I don't know if it's like this everywhere, if a bear comes in late one night, he'll come in earlier the next night. He comes in early. So I figured, next night's the night, and I went out and shot him.
Okay, so that leads into the next thing I want to talk about, and that's I don't know how to put this without sounding arrogant, but I'm just going to come out and say it. There are a few people who sort of get to a pinnacle in the sport of bear hunting, and I would say in Minnesota, there's you and me and maybe a half a dozen other people. I know of one other guy for sure. There's probably some people I don't know about, but let's just say that there are a small number of people who reach a really high level in bear hunting, and in Minnesota, I bet you could count them on your fingers. And as I've talked to them, the amazing thing is we tend to all have ended up at most of the same conclusions. And that's because you're good, and I'm good at letting the bears teach you.
Right.
And I'm saying that as a guy that's got a YouTube channel and makes part of my living teaching people to hunt bears.
Right.
But the reality is you've got to let the bears teach you.
And never stop learning.
And never stop. It is a good point. So where I'm going with that is that you and I, when we talk, I'm always kind of surprised by he's figured that out too, you know what I'm saying?
Yep.
So you talked about the aspect of having a bear that comes in at night and then comes in earlier, and it's a real issue with, let's start talking about nocturnal bears, because we're both on some of this Facebook pages of bear hunting where we both get so frustrated with people when they say, what should I do about my nocturnal bear? And somebody says, play a radio at night, and then they'll come in there. There's so much bad advice.
There is.
But the reality is, if they come to a bait and they find something good to eat and they feel secure there, they might come in at 10 o'clock, the next night they might come in at 9, the next night they might come in at 8, and then, if they feel secure and if you're giving them what they want, their natural tendency is to feed in that last hour of daylight.
Absolutely.
So that's what you saw with this bear as well.
Right. When you're setting up your bear bait, that's the most important thing you can do. is it'll alleviate a lot of these other problems like nocturnal bears. If you get it in the right place, you're gonna have multiple trips every day from the same bear to your bait. And I always look for these, you know, deep dark timber close to water, you know, way back in the middle of nowhere where nobody's bothering them. And they can, biggest thing, they want to stay cool during the day. And that's the biggest thing, you know.
Yeah.
And they go for water, then they go for bait.
Right.
So,
And, you know, I learned that in a really interesting way about, it's been close to 20 years ago now. I kind of lucked onto a really good spot. Had a big bear, and I mean, not this big, but I mean, this was probably pushing 400 pounds. And he come in at the very last moments of light, and I made kind of a bad shot on him. I shot a little low. My arrow had good blood. I'm like, boy, I hope I got a hard shot. So I wasn't far from home, and I went and got my two boys who were like 7 and 9 at the time. And we went tracking this bear, and I had pretty good blood, but I went 100 yards and then 150 yards, and pretty soon I'm pushing my way through, there's like a tunnel, and I'm crawling with us pushing a shotgun in front of me in the dark,
I think we've all done
following
that.
this blood trail, and my two sons are 7 and 9, and they're right behind me, and all of a sudden I'm like, this is not the brightest thing I've ever done.
no.
And I'm like, you know what, we're coming back in the morning. So we come back in the morning, and we started following this blood trail, and all of a sudden this blood trail led to a place that was just like, it was like dark, and it was almost spooky, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
It was this dark, spooky looking spot,
Yes,
and it was
they love it.
was moist.
Yep.
And here's these beds, and there's these big bear beds, and it's like the first time I'd ever actually seen a bear bed.
Mm-hmm.
And when you walked into bed, the water would swoosh up around your feet, and I'm
Staying cool.
like, that was a watershed moment for me, where I just like kind of drove a stake in the ground, and I'm like, okay, I learned something really important from this. So that's a type of, are you trying to, when you scout, are you looking for those specific bedding areas, or are you just trying to find a spot that you know there'll be an area like that close by?
Yes, I you know, it's kind of like hunting a big buck. You don't want to go in their bedding area. So I try to hunt the fringe of that, and I scout for that. I use my Onyx a lot, you know, and that really is really important, Onyx, and find all these lands you can hunt on, and you can tell the terrain what it is, if there's a beaver pond there or whatever. But yeah, I definitely look for those places. And one thing I've noticed is, and I think it's just because maybe the ground is damp, but some of the best bear hunting places have ferns growing in them. Mm-hmm. And I think that's because the tall canopy, the sun doesn't get there and the ground is more moist. And I truly believe that there's more bears in those areas.
And those ferns also give them cover and security.
Absolutely.
So they feel
Yeah.
comfortable, because I found that they don't like walking through open areas
No.
during the daylight. And
No.
you know, a lot of people that watch my channel, you hear the same things over and over again, but they're things that I've learned. And like I said, it's like a guy that's been doing this for
34 years.
34 years.
Yeah.
You've come to we all came from different directions, but it's like the spokes of a wheel. We came to the same conclusions through just hard work and getting out there and doing it and letting the bears teach us. Tell us the story of the state record that you shot 2017 or 18?
17.
2017, okay. Tell us about that bear.
Well, the first time I saw him, I was out in the hayfield, and oh my gosh, you come out right in the middle of the afternoon, started grazing in a clover field, and I'm telling you something, that got my wheels turning, and I couldn't sleep much after that. I kept planning, like, okay, I'm gonna get a tag next year, so I started planning and just kind of looking at everything, and so the following year, I put a bait out, and strictly just for him, I was hunting that bear, and no other bear was gonna be good enough, you know. So I set baits out, and it took him about a week for him to find it. So I'm like, yes, I got him coming in. So he come in like 3 days, and then disappeared for, you know, week and a half, and then he come back. And he was there for probably 4 or 5 days until I shot him. But he was, when he came, he was there all the time. Mm-hmm. And he would just clean up the bait. It wasn't nothing for 50 gallons of food to go away in the course of a day or evening.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And most people don't realize how much these bigger bears, it's shocking how much food that they can put away.
Oh my gosh, yes.
You know, people are thinking, well, I'm gonna go out and I'm gonna put a 5-gallon bucket full a day out, and they're, you know, they could eat you and me and still be hungry.
Right.
You know what I mean?
You know, I'm probably averaging minimum 30 gallons a day on my baits, because you're getting a lot of baits, or a lot of bears on your baits. It's nothing to get 6, 8, even 10 bears on a bait.
Yeah.
So if you don't have enough food out, then what happens when one of these other bears come in that you actually want and there's no food there? He's gonna go somewhere else.
Exactly, and that's another thing that I preach all the time, and I hear people say, you know, if the big ones aren't getting anything to eat, then you gotta cut back on bait so they'll come in earlier, which is really the exact opposite thing that you should do.
And a lot of these bigger bears come in just at the last few minutes of light. So if you got your younger bears and your sows and cubs coming in at 1 o'clock, 2, 3 in the afternoon, a lot of that bait's gonna be eaten up by the time your big bears get there.
Yeah, and ideally, you want them to have enough bait to fill their belly and just go lay up nearby, so when they're hungry, they're close. Otherwise, there's somebody else out there baiting. There's plenty of other food. Like this year, we saw that there was an incredible amount of natural food. I've hardly ever seen anything like it.
It's crazy.
And it just made it a lot tougher. But that's one of the main things, I guess, as far as making sure that there's always enough food there, so that the bear is rewarded when he comes for something to eat. And we don't want him to come and not find anything, because he's going to eat. Right. So if he doesn't find any bait there, he might go to another bait, and these bears travel long distances.
Oh yes, they do. Yep.
And so he could be at another bait. He knows where the oaks are. He knows where the choke cherries are, and hazelnuts. You know, you just don't want to lose him. The key is keep pouring the bait to them and hold them there.
You want to fill them up so they don't go far away, just like you said.
Yeah.
And many times there's, you know, beds 20, 30 yards from my bait. They get full, they go take a nap, and they get up and come and eat again. So, and that's exactly what you want to have happen. And there's different foods you can feed them too, like, you know, you get your granolas and your popcorn that will run through them quicker as well, so they get more return trips to the bait.
Right.
And that's really important to use stuff like that.
Now, let's talk about popcorn for a minute, because I don't really like popcorn, because I feel like it doesn't fill them up. But you're saying that there might be some value to that, because it just goes right through them.
Yes, and they're going to be hungry and come back for more.
Interesting. Okay. Well, there's one area that we disagree, so we'll mark that one down. But the other thing with popcorn that I don't like is that it doesn't weather very well.
No, it does not.
But anyway, I'll have to reconsider that, because you're making a good point there about it going through them. And,
yes.
And the granola, any kind of oats, goes right through them.
Yep.
And in fact, when I've hunted in areas where there's a lot of competition, I've found bear poop by my bait with oats in it that they didn't even digest at all.
Right.
And it was somebody else's bait, from somewhere else, and that bear pooped at my bait, and now he's at my bait, and I got him.
Right.
But the oats, after a week, they sprouted.
Yes.
You've probably seen that before too.
I've seen that, and sunflowers growing out in the middle of the woods too.
Yeah, you know where that came from.
Yep.
Okay, so let's talk about opening a bait, because I saw a video of you using one of those super soakers, spraying oil up in the trees.
Yes, I've been doing that for about 25 years. And I consistently do that, and not just even opening a bait, but I'll do it like every week, because you never know what bear you might be pulling in. But that is one of the best things you can do to get bears to come in fast, because you're putting so much more scent in the air. It disperses the scent. You're getting it high up in the leaves where the scent or the wind can hit the scent better and take it farther. Makes a big difference.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, so we got to address this issue also. You like Bear Sense LLC.
Yes, I do.
Okay, and I'm a Northwoods Bear Products guy.
Yep.
And they're both great products.
They are.
But that should be mentioned anyway. So we'll leave that there. But so you're using a spray that you like in the fall, and here in Minnesota it's all fall hunting.
Yep.
Do you like beaver castor or fruit type sprays, or?
Well, what I generally start my baits with is a bacon, strawberry, blueberry, and I use a root beer or an anise too.
Oh, really?
And I like to use, of course, the root beer, or the blueberry and strawberry, because that's a natural food for them. So, and a lot of people just get one scent, and you need to do more than that. You need to create a buffet of flavors, because you never know what that bear might like. Every bear's individual, as we know.
Right.
So And some of these scents, they travel farther. Some are short range, some are long range scents. So you want to kind of spray a buffet of flavors to help bring them in.
Right.
And that really works. I spray, 3, 4, even as many as 5 different scents out there every time.
Okay.
And every time I go bait, I spray scent. So every time those bears smell that, they go, ooh, dinner time.
Yeah.
So it conditions them to come in.
So how about consistency? Are you not carrying 5 bottles with you every time?
I carry a bucket with them in there. So,
Oh, you do?
Yeah.
So you're gonna use more than one every time?
Absolutely.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah.
That's good for business for your,
Well, I do use a lot of scent. I go through a lot, but that's what we're trying to do, is get the bears to come in.
Yeah.
So I don't care what it costs, I'm gonna do it, so.
right, and there's always a possibility of getting another bear there.
Absolutely.
And it's always good to have as many bears there as possible.
Yes, you get more shooting opportunities that way. Which brings up another topic of people, we were talking about, nocturnal bears and try to create competition, so they want to take the bait away, which is absolutely wrong. So you put out more bait, more scent, and have the bears create the competition.
Right.
And that's the best way to do it.
Yeah.
And granted, there's always an exception out there. Everything's got an exception,
Sure, certainly there are. We're talking in generalities, of course,
Yeah,
but
absolutely.
over time, they teach you something. And I found the same thing, is that the more bears you have,
Yeah.
the more often, the better off you are, because you want interaction.
Yes.
You want them fighting. You want this whole bait to be sort of like the hub of bear activity in that area.
Yep.
And so the more they're interacting, and then a big one like this, if he's laying up nearby, he hears something and he goes, I better go find out what's going on up
That's
there.
right, yep.
What else would you add about opening a bait?
Just put it in the right spot, Do
Yeah.
your scouting and get it in the right spot. And not every bait, but in areas where there's huge woods, or where I want to draw the bears from a long ways away, where I might not have access to, I like to hang a stink bait. So I get some suckers, red horse carp, and I hang them in a burlap sack.
Okay.
And I like to let them juice for a couple days before I put them out, and make a scent drag with them.
Okay.
And then hang them high. And I really believe that really helps, bring bears in from a long ways away. And I know some people say, oh, but it brings in wolves and all that. Well, I live in wolf country here too, and I've never had a wolf on one of my baits here
Yeah.
yet.
Interesting. You've got a few wolves in this area.
Well, this is cattle country. We got lots of wolves here.
Yeah. Yeah, and we should mention that too. You're in kind of atypical bear hunting area. Most people, like where I guide, people come there because they want that North Woods feel. It's the
Right.
lakes, it's the big forest,
Yep.
it's riding four-wheelers. You're in sort of a mixture of ag. You got corn. We're going to talk about corn too, because that's a really important aspect to this. And
Yes, it
people
is.
people who are in this type of area really struggle when they're around corn. So you got corn and oats and hay, and you got pasture. Is there sugar beets in this area very much?
No, there
So
isn't.
you get a little where northwest of here. So we're basically we're west of central Minnesota, basically.
Yep.
But if you go northwest of here, then you get into the sugar beets, and those could
Right.
be in the same type situation. But a lot of where you hunt is blocks of timber that are, it's a checkerboard area where you got these ag fields and
Yep.
pastures and stuff like that. And would you say that that is better habitat for producing huge bears?
Yeah, where it borders the agricultural land here, yes, it's going to definitely produce bigger bears. They have really good genetics here too, so they grow big fast.
Yeah, so you got the genetics, you got abundance of food,
Oh,
because
yeah.
not just natural foods, but you got corn.
Yeah.
And they love the corn.
Oh, my.
And oats, it's pretty easy to get permission from a guy that raises oats to hunt bears, because they roll around in them, they flatten them out, farmers hate the bears.
Yep.
If they're raising oats. When you're looking, I'll just go back to when it's been close to 20 years ago now, and I was struggling to try to figure out how to hunt bears, and just learning a lot of stuff. And I talked to a guy that was fairly successful, and I said, what do you look for in location? And he said, just find the biggest block of timber that you can find and penetrate it.
Yep.
And I think in this area, this type of habitat, that's probably a pretty good strategy. But for me, in the big woods, that doesn't make any sense, because there's a whole lot. It's one little nugget of the whole of the big whole.
Right.
But in here, in this type of habitat, it can be pretty important.
It is, yeah. With all the private land we have, and then there's some county ground and state ground mixed in, you really have got to get in there and find them perfect spots. And you really, there's some big tracts of land around here, big tamarack swamps that are going for miles, and it's very important where you access that and set your bait location up at.
Most of those larger hunks of land like that are probably state land, or are they?
A lot of tax forfeited
Yeah.
or state ground, yeah.
Are most of your bears shot on private land or public?
Most of them are private, because
Yeah.
I'll hunt on the private that borders a lot of that, the state ground or the county ground.
Yeah, and now your family has quite a bit of land in this area. Have you killed big bears on your own land?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So, and maybe you probably just look at land and go, I'm gonna buy that because that's really good.
I wish I could.
Yeah, I've seen situations like that before where a piece of property came up for sale and I went, man, can you kill the bears on that piece of property? But man, what stuff goes for nowadays, it's out of reach for most of us.
And there's so many people that call me up wanting me to come bait bears by their place and get rid of them. So it's
Yeah.
finding a place to hunt for me is not an issue.
Yeah, well, you're in premier big bear habitat, and it like you said, it's partly the genetics.
Yep.
But let's talk about corn. Throw some help out there to people who are baiting around corn and really struggling.
Oh my. That cornfield bears are tough to get out of a cornfield. So if you're trying to pull bears out of a cornfield, it can be almost impossible. So the best thing to do is just find these fields that they're in and set your cameras up, see what you got, and set up on one. Sit there and wait for them. Granted, yes, put a bait back in the woods, but unless it's right on their trail, they're not going to go to it because they already got a belly full of corn. They don't care about your bait.
Yeah.
So you've got to be either right on their trail or sit there and wait for them, and just hopefully one will walk by. And they generally do. They go into the cornfields just before dark or
Yeah.
come out because they got to get water. So
Right. So they're leaving the cornfield for water, and they're sometimes bedding in the cornfield, but
Yes.
not usually especially if it's warm.
right.
They probably aren't finding what they need out there. It just makes it tough, I guess.
Oh, yes.
But you brought to mind something that we talked about earlier, and that is looking on the edges of cornfields is one of your primary scouting tools.
Yes, it sure can be. Yeah.
Okay, because other people will call you and say, I saw a huge bear
Uh-huh.
on the edge of a cornfield and so forth. But, so we talked a little bit earlier about unkillable bears, which I've said that there are big mature males that really have it figured out and they're unkillable by legal means.
Right.
And you kind of disagree with that because you said, and I said they won't come to a bait during the daylight, and you said they won't come to a bait at all.
Yeah, some of them won't, and part of that's probably because of our cornfields we have around here. They don't need to come to a bait. They got all the food they want. They don't have to use any energy to go get it. They just got to lay there and eat all day. So they have no reason to go to a bait. But like you said, there are some bears out there that are unkillable. It's just we have to figure out a different way to kill them.
Right. So we disagree. Well, I shouldn't say we disagree because you're telling me that you can kill these bears from time to time without bait using the corn.
Yep.
And patterning them.
Yes. You got to pattern them.
Right.
And beat them at their own game, basically.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. So they really wouldn't be unkillable by legal means. They're just unkillable by baiting them.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. That's fair enough. Let's talk a little bit about the difference between the average bear and a really big male. I mean, most of the bears shot in Minnesota are
Little.
they're terribly little. They're yearlings, and
Right.
they're you got yearlings, you got 2-year-olds, and the majority of bears that are killed in this state are shot because the people shoot the first bear they see.
Right.
So, talk about a little bit about passing bears, about how do these bigger bears act differently?
Yeah, once these bears get to be 300 pounds or bigger, they start taking on a different characteristic. they're just more cautious. It's how they approach the bait. They always come from downwind. I've had bears so excited to come to my bait, they don't care which way the wind's from. They actually come running into the baits. You know, they're so excited. It's a happy place,
Yeah.
and that's what you want to make your bait, is a happy place, a safe, happy place for them. But these bigger bears, they definitely, they come in right before dark. And when you're not at the bait, they're there at 1 o'clock in the afternoon.
Yeah, that's right. So they know you're there.
Most of the big ones, a lot of bears know you're there, but I try to make sure nobody knows I'm there. With I use a lot of my different scent products, scent elimination products, and I'm a big believer in ozonics. I know a lot of people think that's a joke or a gimmick. It's not. You know, I had this big guy right behind us at 10 or 12 yards directly downwind, and he didn't smell me. And so you know that's working.
Yeah.
But these bigger bears, they're a lot sharper than them smaller 150, 200 pounders.
So let's say here comes a 2.5-year-old bear, and he looks up in the tree and there's something there, and he knows there's something there, but he can't figure out that it's a human. Okay, but he maybe ramps up the caution a little bit, but he comes anyway.
Right.
Let's say that's a 8-year-old, 400-pounder. How is he going to react in that situation?
You know, they'll react several different ways. They don't always, you know, half the bears come in, they'll look at you. Some stand there and look at you. If you don't move, you're fine. Because bears have great eyesight, contrary to popular belief.
Right.
They have great eyesight. They can pick up movement like that just
Yeah.
in a heartbeat. So a lot of them, if you don't move, they'll sit there, they'll have a stare down with you, and then they'll say, oh, okay, you know, and then just go off to the bait. And so the next one's going to come in and go, I don't like that there, and I'm going to back out. Something's off, something's wrong. I don't like that. He's going to stand up and sniff a little bit, and probably turn and leave.
So if he doesn't smell you, that's the situation.
Right.
Let's say that he smells you.
Okay. Sometimes, you know, they do smell you, but if you're the one baiting all the time at this bait, your scent is part of the whole deal in the package, so they kind of get used to that. So it's just like spraying scent out every time you go there. It's part of the whole package.
Right.
And they do get used to that. Now, some bears will never get used to that, your scent, and some will. So it's you know, it's a 6 of one, half a dozen of
Well,
another.
I've heard people say that bears have different personalities, which is they're not persons, so they don't have personalities, but they're so individuals.
They are.
They are. Some bears will they'll overlook things that shock you.
Right.
And other times you'll have a bear that like he will not come when there's a person on the bait
Right.
for 5 times, and then all of a sudden there's a person on the bait and he rolls right in. You go, what in the world?
Right.
You know, so it's
Some of those bears get so comfortable coming in, they don't even give it a second thought. You know, they're there every day, nothing happens, they come in, oh, no big deal, and they just walk right in, don't care.
yeah. Even the big ones, they just roll in like
Some of them
they're
do.
a cub
This-
practically.
The 685 pounder I shot didn't even hesitate. He just come right in like nobody's business.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And what time of the day was that? Was that?
That was 7:19 in the evening, so I only had about, what, 5 minutes of shooting light
Yeah,
left?
that was right at the very
Yeah,
end. Yeah. And the one thing that I've noticed is that a lot of people, and it's getting worse because it's hard to get a tag in Minnesota.
Oh my gosh.
A lot of people just want to get a bear. And if they want to shoot a bigger bear, they have to learn to pass other opportunities. People are waiting, you're in 45,
Yep.
which it can be up to 7 years
Oh, it's
to
terrible.
get a tag in Minnesota. And so people, their attitude is, it took me this long to get a tag, I'm going to get a bear.
Right.
You would think that people might say, well, if it took me this long, maybe I should be more selective and
Absolutely.
really try to get a big one. But
Right.
that doesn't seem to be the trend, because I've talked to a lot of people. I got my finger on the pulse of bear hunters
Right.
in Minnesota, and this is what I'm seeing is people are saying, I'm going to get a bear, and so they're shooting these 150 pounders or less, or yearlings, or
And those are the ones that need to let go and grow up. a little bit.
not just grow up, but also if you shoot one of those, you're probably not gonna shoot it at the last minute of daylight when, like that big one that I shot when I talked about that swampy area with the beds.
Yep.
I mean, he stepped out at the last 5 minutes of shooting light,
Yep.
and that's so common for them.
Yes, yes it is.
And that's where you see, that's when you see the big ones. But another mistake that people make, and I guess I'm talking too much, and I got to ask you another question here, but I'm going to say one more thing. People tend to get out of the stand too early. They tend to be fearful of getting out in full dark. This is what I found, and they're like, you know what, here it is. There's only 15 minutes of shooting light left, and
Right.
and you know, if I get out now, I won't have to turn my light on, and I can get back out to my truck. And they're blowing it. The best time of the day, they're blowing it.
Yes, they are. You gotta wait, and there's been times where I've had bears come in right at the last few minutes, and it wasn't the bear I wanted, but yet I still couldn't get out of the stand. So there's been nights I couldn't get out of the stand till 9 o'clock. Have to just sit there and wait, enjoy the show, or listen for them, or whatever, and wait for the cell cam pictures to come in and let me know the coast is clear. But yeah, that's a big thing, and you got to pass up those smaller bears. I don't even like to hunt till 1st of October, so I just sit there and keep baiting and enjoy the show and enjoy the pictures and keep learning more, because the longer I bait, and you go through the different phases of these bears, the more I learn. You know, I can try different techniques, and it's amazing the bears you can bring in, and the bigger bears. And some of these bigger bears, they don't stick around long. They might only be at your bait once or twice and they're gone. You never see them again.
Right.
And they're the bigger ones. But that's when I tell people that even if you don't have a bear coming in on your bait, scent it up and sit there, because you never know when one of these big giants is going to walk in. And as they're traveling and migrating, looking for food, because these big boars definitely do that. And
Yeah,
even
they
some of
do.
these big sows do that too. They migrate quite a ways.
They do, and we found that with, now that they've been putting GPS collars on these bears, the distances that they travel are shocking.
I know.
And you know, they've got bears that they've put collars on clear up north of Grand Rapids that are going every year
To Brainerd.
to down north of Brainerd, where there's a bunch of white oaks
Yep.
that are just the kind of trees that they like.
Yep.
They're going 60 miles
Yeah.
to where those oak trees are.
Sows
It's
and cubs are making that too.
Well,
Yeah.
that's the only way they would know that they're there, isn't
Right,
it? I mean,
right.
that's a question that people have asked me. Well, how do they know all that's there? They can't smell that. I think it's generational. It has to be.
It's got to be.
That they just keep doing that, because sows with cubs are making that.
Yep.
And people don't realize how far bears travel. It's shocking. They had a GPS collar sow that left that Grand Rapids area,
Yep.
went all the way across into Canada, clear up to Atikokan. You know where that's at? It's up into Ontario quite a
Yes.
ways.
Yep.
She denned up there and had her cubs up there, and the next summer she was back to Grand Rapids with those little bitty cubs.
Yep.
Can you imagine how many lakes and they had to cross, and roads and swamps and
Yep.
climbing over logs and stuff, those little cubs?
Amazing animal.
That's hundreds and hundreds of miles, and
Right.
it's incredible what they'll do. So people talk about home ranges of bears and stuff like that, and I think we just throw home ranges out. Would you agree with that?
On some bears, they travel, but there's bears that are here year after year after year, and they stay here.
They're denning somewhere and they're
Yes.
staying here.
Yes. Even some of these giants aren't even traveling out of the area. This is their core area, and they stay here. But for the most part, yes, bears do migrate quite a bit. You know.
Interesting. So do you think some of these bigger bears like this, we're talking these Boone and Crockett's, they found a spot that's really, really good, and
Yes.
maybe just settled in and said, this is where I'm gonna live?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. You know, and it's just like same thing with if you find a big bear in one area, and let's say you shoot him, another year or two, there's another big bear in that area. It's just like same thing with a buck. They just like that same habitat. You shoot a big buck out of an area, next year there'll be another one there, because it's the same area. They just like that kind of area, and they just keep moving in.
So are you shooting, you've been doing this for 30 some years. What's a site that you've shot the most really big ones off? Have you got one bait that is like, yeah, I've killed a lot of huge ones off of there?
Not really one particular bait, but in that same general area. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So multiple baits in that area, or you just move the bait around?
Multiple baits in that area.
Okay. How far apart would your closest baits be?
I try not to get any closer than 3 miles.
Okay.
And I do have some that are a little bit closer, but that's because of the way the land flows.
Okay.
And you gotta keep that into consideration too, and I'll get a little overlap at 3 miles,
Sure.
you know.
Yeah, you'll get some on both baits, even at 3 miles.
Yeah.
So the philosophy for a guide is a little different, because you know, if you're 3 miles apart and a bear's visiting both baits,
Right.
you don't want to be on that bait when he's on this one.
Right.
But if you're a guide, you're just like, I'll just put somebody on both baits.
Right. That would work too.
So it doesn't matter to a guide. But for a guy that's hunting for himself, I always say 2 mile minimum, and I actually over the years have started to think that it should probably be more like 4 miles.
Yeah,
And
close
it,
to
but
five,
it
yeah.
depends on the habitat.
Right.
You know, it depends on what's the barriers between there.
Yep.
And it's not, I mean, it's not rivers and things like that. The barriers would be like pastures or
Roads.
you know, something that, not that a bear can't cross, because they go anywhere they want.
Right. Yeah.
But it's maybe a interstate, or you know, a really well heavily traveled road, or open pasture or something like that. And it's more that what a bear wouldn't want to cross.
Right.
It would be a barrier.
Food access too, access to the different crops or whatever, make a big difference for that too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Because you can almost know which way they're going, because if there's a cornfield over a certain direction. And I try to get away from cornfields. I try to find them bears that are way off in the middle of nowhere that just want to be left alone and not even go into a cornfield.
Yeah.
Because when you get near a cornfield, it gets a lot harder to get them.
Yeah. So you're a firearms hunter. Have you bow killed bears too, or?
No, I haven't. I'm not. I would like to, but I got a lot of metal in me and bad neck and back issues, so
Okay.
I try not to do that. So.
Now, so how far away from the bait is your stand typically?
I like setting up right about 20 yards.
Okay.
No farther than 30.
Right.
But most of my baits are in that 20-yard mark.
Now, you also said that these bigger bears tend to come in, well, you said they always come in from downwind, I think is what you said. They pretty much have an approach. Do you notice that this bear always approaches a bait this way?
There has been several bears that they always came from the same spot, from the same trail or from the same direction.
They like consistency. They like things that are
Creatures of habit.
They are creatures of habit. So that's something that people really need to realize too, is they don't like it. They don't like major changes.
No.
They don't like it if you start using a different bait. They don't like it if you start using a different scent.
Right.
There's times that I've seen bears who were consistent, and I ran out of one kind of spray and I started using another one, and they just all of a sudden they went nocturnal. And I think what happened is they hung up. They're like, wow, that's different.
Yep.
And when it's different, they're like, I think I'm just going to wait till dark.
The littlest change can make a big difference.
A lot of times you don't realize they're playing with their life.
Oh yeah.
Okay, this is their whole life that they're putting on the line.
Right.
And a lot of people think, well, if you just put the right kind of bait out there, they'll come into the daylight, or if you just do this or do that.
No.
It's like they're not going to risk their life and put their life on the line for when they don't feel safe.
Right.
And you call it a happy place. I like that too, because they feel confident there. They walk in, and even the bigger ones, if you see bigger ones that are just rolling in 15 minutes, half an hour before dark, you know you're doing it right, your location's right, and there's so many things that you can do right and wrong. What would you say, and I think I know what you're going to answer, what the value of your location, how does that factor into where you're hunting? How important is the value of location compared to all the other aspects?
It's probably the single most important thing. Mm-hmm. Your bait location and stand placement, everything. When I go into an area and set up a bait, I try to imagine which way the bear is going to be coming from, so I know where to set my stand and how to angle everything so that bear is going to come in broadside. It's the single most important thing. And that will alleviate a lot of your other problems, you know, like as far as your nocturnal bears and everything else.
Now, when you talk about, you try to predict which way they're gonna come from.
Right.
Is that based on a prevailing wind direction, or is that based on where they might be bedding or swamps?
Yeah, either where they're feeding or bedding,
Okay.
swamps, because they're generally gonna come from there.
Right.
And I try to get within several hundred yards of that without bumping them out of there.
Yeah. So would you say there's an ideal, you're always sitting around water like I am. I feel like
Close
it's
by.
really, really important.
It is.
Would you say there's an ideal distance? 100 yards, 300 yards, quarter mile? Is there an ideal?
You know, that can vary depending on location. And with your water source or your food sources, that can all vary. But I try to be like within several hundred yards of a beaver pond, and you can get closer. I just don't want to, you know, bump anything out of there during the day when I'm baiting or, you know, disturb the area. I try not to disturb it. I get in, get out, and
So you would say the ideal distance would be that you can go in there and bait without spooking them,
Absolutely.
but they're also close enough that when they get up and
Just
go,
a-
well, let's go get something to eat, they
minute.
actually get there before dark.
a minute or two later, they're on your bait. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So that's something that occurred to me at some point where I had nocturnal bears and I just thought, well, I know where they're bedding, and the problem is the sun gets below the trees and they're laying there in the edge of a swamp, and they get up and stretch and go, I think I'll go get something to eat. Well, it's taking them too long to get to my bait and it's dark.
Right.
So I'm like,
Get closer. to
duh,
it. Yeah.
I just gotta be closer to where,
Get closer.
you know, that was another one of those aha moments for me. Let's talk a little bit about what you use for bait.
Yep.
Sweets versus, you know, you mentioned popcorn and you didn't say oatmeal, I guess you said granola.
Granola. Yeah.
Have you used trail mix and,
Yeah. So I always generally use a candy trail mix, because if you use just one that's just solid nuts, they don't seem to like that as well, because they got acorns and hazelnuts here. So a candy trail mix works great. I do not use a lot of licorice. I, however, do use some candies like candy corn or some other little things like that. That works great. I like the caramel popcorn, and one of my favorites is the peanut butter Rice Krispie treats.
oh yeah,
Bears love them.
Yeah, they
I
do.
feed a lot, many totes of that.
Yeah.
It's good stuff. And I use some granolas, Pop-Tarts. Some bears really like them and some not so much. So that's kind of a hit and miss, but it's still a good filler bait. That's basically the bulk of it, and then I can add some different stuff in there too, because when I'm baiting, you know, I might range 30 miles, 15, 20, 30 miles, and those bears can be a lot different in what they want to eat from the north to the south part of my bait string. So I have to alter it a little bit with some different stuff. But I do use a little bit of licorice, not much. This year they didn't eat the licorice very good at all.
yeah,
They were just wanting other stuff.
yeah. So when you say candy trail mix, it's got nuts in it, but it's also got more M&Ms.
M&Ms and a little bit of chocolate, not much. You don't want to feed a lot of chocolate. So, but you know, there's other kind of goodies in there. You know, some caramel, candy corn and other stuff in there. So,
Yeah. Interesting, because I found that, you know, I've done a lot of promotion of trail mix. I love trail mix.
works great.
And as that, I've done that, a lot of the bait suppliers are calling a lot of stuff trail mix, because there's a little, it's not just me, but
Right.
people have figured out that trail mix works really good.
Right.
And so the demand has been raised, and all of a sudden you're going to a bait supplier and you open up a barrel of trail mix and it's got pretzels and
Right.
chocolate bars and
Right.
cookies and stuff like that.
It's not really a trail mix.
It's not really trail mix. So a trail mix for me is predominantly nuts, but it's also got that sweets mixed in
Yes.
it. And sometimes I'll get some that's pretty much all nuts. If it's got dried fruits in it, I love it.
That's what I've
Dried
got some-
pineapple and stuff like, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I've got some of that.
Jeepers.
I save that for special occasions.
Oh, if you can find that, it's like, I found a whole super sack of it this year. I paid $700 for a super sack
Worth it.
of it, but it was worth every dime.
Yeah.
And, but if it doesn't have sweets mixed in, then I'll do like you said, is I'll throw a bucket of candy corn in
Yeah.
each time I fill the barrel or something like
Yep,
that.
yep.
And then I found that you can over sugar the bears.
Absolutely.
So as it's getting, so you don't want to feed too much sugar for too long or you start to lose your bears, and
Right.
that happens, particularly happens, it seems like right when the acorns fall and everything else is coming ripe, and there's blackberries at the end of August and stuff like that, and it's kind of everything hits at once.
Right.
And so would you talk a little bit about that as far as sugar? Do you change the amount of sugar, or you just kind of consistently go throughout the whole?
I consistently kind of feed the same through the whole course of the season. Everybody knows September 1st, bear season opens, and that kind of coincides with the acorns dropping, right? So one trick I do, and I'm able to keep roughly 50% of my bears on baits, and even in the daylight, is that trail mix we talked about earlier, the dried fruit. So I'll give them some of that, and maybe some beaver meat or something, but give them some of that because they just absolutely devour that stuff. And then I will take it away from them, and then right before the acorns drop, I give it back to them. So then bears keep coming in for that because they're not getting it anywhere else, and they absolutely just devour it and love it. So they keep coming in even as the acorns are dropping. And I've noticed over the years that about 2 weeks after the acorns drop, the bears start coming back into the baits because they've fed on that protein, and nature's going to tell them to do that anyway. They're going to feed. And so even though they might not be eating much when they come to your bait, they're going to still come back and sniff and check it out. And so it generally takes about 2 weeks and they start to show back up a little bit.
Right.
For most people, but I can keep mine going pretty much all the time.
Right. So you mentioned also that you prefer to hunt later in the season, but you like to keep baiting, and it's
Yeah.
like me. It's
Baiting's the best part of it.
It's so much fun. It's like I have a history as a commercial fur trapper,
Right.
and bear baiting is so much the same type of thing because you get that dopamine hit, I guess, or whatever, when you come and everything's all tore up, and then you got the trail camera pictures, which is
Yeah, that's addicting, isn't it?
yeah, man. Not everybody gets that, but most of the people watching this video fortunately know what we're talking about.
Yeah.
But you'd rather just keep doing that and then kill that bear later on.
Yes.
Do they become? It's a trade-off in the late season because the daylight hours are shorter.
Yes.
But do they become more consistent at later on, or?
Most of my bears are pretty consistent, but usually later on is when you have a chance of getting a monster bear, just one that's traveling. And that's why I like to do it. And they've got nicer fur on them. They're rugged out nicer, so they make a better rug or a mount, and no mosquitoes. So
Yeah, that's a big deal.
Yeah, and you can see better because the leaves are starting to come off the trees, so you
Yeah.
can see better. And I just enjoy it more.
Well, it's more comfortable to sit out there for sure when
Absolutely.
it's in the 50s than when it's in the 80s.
Right. I like using my cell cams. One thing you can use that so you're not bumping your bears off the bait, because that's very important. And a second thing, I think there's a safety thing involved, so you're not putting yourself in a bad position by walking into a sow and cubs or something to that effect, because I've been growled at, charged, snarled at, woofed at. So I think running cell cams is not only convenient, but it's a safety thing too.
So how do you keep the bears from chewing the antennas off the cell cams?
Well, when somebody finds it out, let me know.
Yeah, that's really what keeps me from doing it. Is man, you got to put a new antenna on there.
I bought 6 new antennas, and I think I used my last one here last week. So they knock them off.
Yeah.
But when you have bears spending that much time at the baits, they're going to get your camera or knock the antenna off. And I wish they'd just make an antenna-less one, or with an antenna wrapped around the cage or something, just so it wouldn't be an external antenna.
Yeah, I don't know if there's enough bear hunters to justify that, but it's a serious problem with.
Yes, they're curious.
Yeah, they're very curious, and that's another thing that I had a conversation with somebody the other day who said, well, the bears are biting your cameras because you got bait on your fingers, and I'm like, wait a minute. I got oil all over the place here.
Right.
You got a whole pile of bait over there. Why would they care about what little bait was on my fingers
Right.
when I got it on the camera? It's just that they're curious.
They're very curious.
And if they feel comfortable there, if they're spending a lot of time there, they're looking around going, what's that over there? And pretty soon, I use boxes on all mine. I don't know if you're using
Just
boxes.
still break the antennas off with boxes.
Yeah.
So, you know, I've got bears that sleep at the bait. You know, you have a 400-pounder come in and sleep right there and spend all night there and basically guard the bait.
Yeah.
And one thing I've noticed over the years is I really like barrels, but I'm going away from barrels and just going to a bait pile. And I seriously think, not that big bears don't go into bait barrels, because they do, but I think I've had just way better luck and more bears and bigger bears when I just use a bait pile.
Do you think it's a natural kind of, it feels more natural to them?
Yes, and I've seen guys that have these pits and they got just a very intricate log covering, and like, oh, that bear's gonna have to work to get in there. You don't want to make it hard for a bear to get in your bait.
Yeah.
That's the worst thing you could ever do. You know, let him get in there so he can get there easily. You don't want to stop him from getting to your bait.
Well, there's some advantages to using barrels. It's weatherproof, and
Absolutely.
you can use it to meter out how much bait. But you're saying you think the trade-off and the fact that doesn't seem as natural, you feel like that's worth it.
Yes.
Okay, interesting. That's something that definitely deserves more exploration, because you know, if you watch any of my videos, I'm all about making the bears feel confident and secure.
Yes.
And that's just an aspect of making it feel more natural to them.
Right.
And it's one of the reasons why people say, why in the world do you go to the trouble to spray paint your barrels? And I camouflage my barrel. It just looks better.
Makes more natural looking.
It's more natural looking to everyone, and there's a lot of reasons to do it. But that's a really good point that deserves to be looked into further.
I've had barrels that I've put out and my bait pile right next to each other, and they go to the bait pile first every time.
Now, you mentioned beaver meat. Now, in Minnesota, we can't legally hang a whole beaver.
No.
But you can use
Chunks of beaver meat.
Chunks of beaver meat.
Yep.
And I've said for 20 years that beavers like crack cocaine.
Oh.
It's something about it. They love beaver meat.
Yeah.
Where I guide, there's too many wolves, and I
Wolves love beaver meat too.
yeah, and you know, I love using beef scraps, beef fat, because it's sweet, and bears love meat. They're not efficient
Absolutely.
predators. They get really good at picking out the stuff that they really like, and I've seen them dig through a lot of good stuff to get to like ribeye trimmings and stuff like that. But you got some wolves here too.
Oh, absolutely.
Are you? I mean, what's your feelings on using meat?
I like using meat. It's funny though, I've noticed over the years, so you got your small bears come in and they're after the sweeter stuff, and your bigger, more mature bears, they'll go after that meat first. And you could have that beaver meat underneath some powdered sugar, honey covered donuts, and they'll dig that out to get to that meat.
Yeah.
And mostly what I do is I use the fish, or even put some beaver meat in that gunny sack, so they can smell that, hang it high, and eventually they do climb the tree and get it, or they'll bite the rope off or something. They'll figure out how to get it because they want it. But I think that's a very important part of my baiting technique, is using some kind of meat in it. I don't use it everywhere, but there's certain bears just love it.
Now, you've had wolves on your baits.
I've never had one on my bait yet.
Oh, you've never had one come to your
Never,
bait?
never.
Oh, interesting. Because the question I'd like to ask other people who are experiencing what I'm experiencing is that I've had a lot of wolves on baits the last 10 years. It's gotten worse and worse. And I've seen them completely shut a bait down.
Oh yeah.
But I've also seen times when it didn't seem to make that much difference. So bears will never typically be there when the wolves are there, not, at least not for long. One or the other is going to win the confrontation, but they don't like wolves. And I think wolves are one of the few predators of bears. I know they eat a lot of bear cubs.
Oh yes.
And but so you know there's wolves in the area, but you just don't have them on your baits.
Right. They chased my cows through a fence on Monday morning. I'm still trying to find a few of them. So yeah, they're tough around here. But this is cattle country. Wolves don't want nothing to do with anything human.
Yeah.
It's not a good day for them if they do, so.
Yeah, so they smell the human scent around the bait and they're like, nah,
Yeah, they're gone.
Let's give some advice to a guy out there who's watching this and he's killed a few bears and he says, I just want to kill a Boone and Crockett. I just want to kill a 500 pounder. You've killed, how many Boone and Crocketts have you killed?
I've got 4 anyway that I.
Okay, so I've got, I think 4 also that would make Boone and Crockett minimums. I haven't ever officially scored or entered them. I've killed, I think 6 over 400 pounds. You probably have more than that.
I'm right about there. I think I got 5 over 400.
Okay.
You know.
And you got a 685, which probably out of my wheelhouse. I don't know.
My last 3 bears, I've got a 585 pound average on the last 3
Okay.
bears.
Yeah. You got me on that one. You trumped me on that one because my biggest one's 500.
Yeah.
So there's a guy out there, there's lots of people out there watching this right now going, I would just love to kill one of those absolute giants. Is there 2 or 3 things that you could give him and say, this is what you need to do different than what you're doing right now in killing 200 pounders?
Well, you got to scout. You got to find them first, and you got to hunt that bear. You can't just go throw a bait in the woods and go, okay, see what comes in. Yeah, you can get lucky like that, but it's better to find him and take the game to his court, and put it right on his front porch. Put that bait right on his front porch, and you got to pass up the smaller bears. You just can't shoot the 250 pounder comes in, and that's like our average bear around here, 250, 275 pounds. They're everywhere. Mm-hmm. But you got to pass up the smaller ones, and basically you got to target a bigger bear. You go. So
first you got to find them, and then you just focus on hunting that individual bear. How do you find them?
You just got to scout and look for signs. Simple thing, drive down some of these dirt roads and watch for the power line poles. They're marked up. Bears love marking up power line poles. Yep. Look for scratches, scratching or rubs, and go in from there. Find your swampy areas where they might be living. Set up some cameras or just look for scat or whatever. And if it's really big, chances are it's a big bear.
Yeah.
And big trails. Big bears have big feet. They'll make a big trail.
And you'll see the individual footprints.
Yes, and look for around like stock ponds or water holes for our cows. You can go there and look for big tracks. They go to drink water there. So mm-hmm. I always stop and look. Every one I look all the time. Walk around them. Good place to look for nice deer tracks too. So you never know what you might find. Okay, interesting. That's a lot of people always just think about finding a great place to put a bait out. They don't think about looking for a big bear and then put the bait to target that bear. Yep. That's something that's pretty foreign to most of us. Well, that's what I do. I target big bears.
Well, you can't argue with the results. So anyway, this has been kind of long, and I appreciate you sticking it out through the whole thing. I hope you learned something from this. I know I did. Jesse's a very successful bear hunter, and his advice is good advice. And so thank you for being along with us, and we'll see you on the next video.